Story: The Serpent's Lament. The year is 1708. The air in Kyoto is thick with the scent of plum blossoms and the damp earth of early spring. It is a city of exquisite contradictions, where the profane world of merchants and samurai brushes against the sacred boundaries of 1,000 temples. And above it all, nestled into the forested embrace of Ottawa Mountain, sits Kiyomizu-dera, the temple of pure water. It is a place of pilgrimage, a testament to faith, built on a spectacular wooden stage that juts out over the hillside, constructed without a single nail. It is a place of peace, or it was. My story begins with a young acolyte named Kenji. He was barely a man, with a face as smooth as a river stone, and eyes that held the earnest, searching light of the devout. He had come to Kiyomizu-dera from a small village by the sea, a place where the loudest sound was the crash of waves. The disciplined silence of the temple was, to him, a form of music. He embraced the routine. The pre-dawn chanting that vibrated through the wooden floors, the meticulous sweeping of fallen leaves from the stone paths, the quiet meditation that aimed to empty the mind of all worldly clutter. His master, the abbot Genshin, was a man who seemed as ancient as the gnarled tines that clung to the mountainside. His skin was a roadmap of wrinkles, each line a story, each fold a lesson learned. Genshin moved with a deliberate slowness that spoke not of frailty, but of immense patience. He saw the fire in Kenji's spirit and sought to temper it, to teach him that true strength was not in force, but in stillness. "The mountain speaks, Kenji," Genshin told him one afternoon as they stood on the grand stage, looking out over the sea of green treetops. "It speaks in the rustle of leaves, in the cry of the hawk, in the silence between the cicadas' songs. You must learn to listen not with your ears, but with your entire being." Kenji bowed, absorbing the lesson. For his first few months he found that peace. The world outside with its passions and its pains felt 1,000,000 miles away. Here there was only the scent of incense, the warmth of the sun on ancient wood, and the gentle gurgle of the Ottawa waterfall, whose 3 streams promised wisdom, health, and longevity to those who drank from them. The temple's heart, in many ways, was its shoro, the bell tower. It housed a magnificent bronze bell, a bonsho of immense size and resonant beauty. Its voice was deep and profound, a sound that could shake the very soul and call it to prayer. It was rung at the dawn of the new year, and for special ceremonies, its peal rolling down the mountain and across the city, a reminder of the eternal. The bell was a symbol of clarity, of awakening. The first time it happened, Kenji thought he was dreaming. He was in his small cell, transcribing a sutra. The moon was a perfect silver coin in the black sky. The only sounds were the scratching of his brush on rice paper and the distant hoot of an owl. Then he heard it. Bong. It was not the full-throated, majestic toll he had heard during ceremonies. This was a single discordant note. It was mournful and sharp, like a cry of pain given metallic form. The sound didn't roll. It stabbed through the silence, vibrating with an unsettling energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It seemed to come from the direction of the bell tower, yet it was impossible. The mallet, a great log suspended by ropes, was tied securely. No one would be ringing the bell at this hour. He froze, his brush hovering over the paper, a drop of black ink swelling and falling, staining the page like a tear. He waited, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. But there was only silence. He told himself it was the wind, a trick of the acoustics on the mountain, an echo from some other temple far away. He finished his work, but sleep did not come easily. The ghost of that sound clung to the edges of his hearing. A week later, it happened again. This time he was outside, walking the veranda. The sound was clearer, louder. Bong. It was a sound of pure anguish. This was not the call to prayer. It was a shriek of rage. Kenji sprinted towards the bell tower, his wooden sandals clattering on the stone path. The moonlight cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to claw at his heels. He burst into the clearing and stared up at the bell tower. The great swinging log was motionless, lashed tightly in its place. The bell itself hung dark and silent, a bronze giant asleep. There was no one there, yet the air still thrummed with the aftershock of the sound. a physical pressure against his eardrums. A cold dread, colder than the night air, seeped into his bones. He was not the only one to hear it this time. The next morning, the other monks spoke of it in hushed, fearful tones. They avoided looking at the bell tower. One of the older monks, Daichi, a man with a perpetually worried face, claimed to have seen a flicker of movement by the tower. A shadow, he said, like a woman's silhouette, dissolving into the darkness the moment the bell rang. He was dismissed as being fanciful, but the fear was contagious. The temple's serene atmosphere began to curdle. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. The monks started at every unexpected sound. Their chants seemed less confident, their meditations fraught with distraction. The unstruck bell had become a malevolent presence, a ghost in the machine of their sacred lives. Kenji, driven by a mixture of fear and a desperate need for answers, approached Master Genshin. He found the old abbot in the main hall, seated before the statue of the Bodhisattva Canon, a lit stick of incense held between his gnarled fingers. "Master," Kenji began, his voice trembling slightly. "The bell." Genshin did not turn. He simply sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "So, it has begun again." The words chilled Kenji more than the phantom tolling itself. "Again? Master, what is it? What is happening?" Genshin placed the incense in a bronze bowl. The fragrant smoke curled upwards, like a spirit ascending. He turned his ancient eyes, deep and filled with a sorrow Kenji had never seen before, upon the young acolyte. "Some stories are not meant for sutras, Kenji. Some pains are so deep they stain the very world around them. Come, walk with me. It is time you knew the story of the serpent's lament." They walked towards the bell tower, but stopped at a safe distance. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. "That bell," Genshin said, his voice low, "was not forged in peace. It was born of passion, genius, and a betrayal so profound it created a wound in time. Decades ago, long before I was abbot, there was a woman in the city below. Her name was Aiko." Genshin paused, gathering the threads of the past. Aiko was not a noble woman. She was the daughter of a blacksmith, but the gods had blessed her with a talent that defied her station. She was an artist, a master of metal, while other women learned the tea ceremony. She learned the secrets of the forge. She could read the soul of bronze, could coax from it shapes and sounds of impossible beauty. Her skill was a fierce, burning thing. It was said she didn't hammer metal, she commanded it. But her greatest passion was reserved for one man, a samurai of high rank named Kaito. Kenji listened, captivated. The world of the temple faded away, replaced by the vibrant, dangerous world of the city Genshin described. Kaito was charismatic and ambitious. He was dazzled by Aiko's talent, her untamed spirit. He pursued her, and she, who had given her heart to no one but her art, fell for him completely. It was a love that was a fire, all-consuming. Kaito commissioned her to create a new bell for a temple he patronized. Not this temple, another. He promised her that its voice would make her name immortal, that their love would be sung from the mountaintops for 1,000 years. For an entire year, Genshin continued, his voice barely a whisper. Aiko worked. She poured everything she was into that bell, her genius, her hopes, her boundless love for Kaito. She developed a new alloy, a secret mixture that she believed would produce a tone of unparalleled purity. She fasted and prayed, treating the creation of the bell as a sacred act. Her father, the old blacksmith, warned her. He saw the fever in her eyes. He told her she was not just casting a bell, she was casting her own soul into the bronze. She finished it on the eve of the winter solstice. It was a masterpiece. The carvings on its surface were of celestial dragons and lotus blossoms. So intricate, they seemed to breathe. And its voice. Aiko struck it once, a gentle tap, and the resulting tone was so pure, so resonant, it brought tears to her eyes. It was the sound of perfect harmony. It was the sound of her love. Genshin's face hardened. She sent word to Kaito, and she waited, and waited, but he never came. Instead, a few days later, she heard news from the city. Lord Kaito was to be married to the daughter of a powerful daimyo. It was a political alliance, a move to secure his own power and influence. Aiko, the blacksmith's daughter with fire in her heart and soot on her hands, was a passionate dalliance, but she was not a suitable wife. She had served her purpose. The betrayal shattered her, but the final, most cruel blow was yet to come. Kaito, knowing the value of the masterpiece she had created, sent his men to her workshop, not to pay her, not to thank her, but to seize the bell. He claimed it as his own commission, his own property. They took it by force, casting her aside. Kenji felt a surge of anger on behalf of this woman he had never met. And the bell? Kaito presented it to the temple as his own gift, his own creation. His name was lauded. He was praised for his piety and his artistic sensibility. Aiko's name was never mentioned. Her genius was erased. Her love was mocked. Her soul, which she had poured into the bronze, was stolen. Genshin looked up at the bell tower of Kiyomizu-dera, its silhouette now black against the dying light. What happens to a fire when it is denied air, Kenji? It does not simply go out, it smolders. It becomes smoke and poison. Aiko's love curdled into a hatred so immense, so absolute, it was a living thing. She went to the temple where her bell now hung, a monument to her stolen legacy. She stood before it and she laid a curse upon it, a curse born of a broken heart and a betrayed soul. She cursed it with her rage, her jealousy, her unending sorrow. She swore that it would never again ring with the pure tone she had created. It would only ever sound with the echo of her pain. It would become a voice for her vengeance. Then, in the shadow of her own creation, she took her life. A cold wind swept down the mountain, rattling the leaves. Kenji shivered.
The monks at that temple tried to ring the bell, Genshin said. But when they struck it, the sound was horrific. It was a discordant shriek, a sound of madness and despair that caused men to clutch their heads in agony. They soon realized the truth. The bell was haunted. Terrified, they sought to be rid of it. No other temple would take it. It was an object of great beauty, but it was poisoned. Eventually, the abbot here at Kiyomizu-dera, a compassionate man, agreed to accept it. He believed that the sacred ground of Otowa Mountain, the purity of Kanon's grace, could soothe the tormented spirit within. He was wrong, Genshin concluded, his voice heavy with finality. We moved it here. For years it was silent. We performed rituals, we chanted sutras for the liberation of Aiko's soul. We thought we had succeeded, but her rage is like a serpent. It sleeps, but it does not die. Every few decades it awakens, and it rings the bell. Not with the mallet, but with the force of its own memory, its own unending pain. The story settled over Kenji like a shroud. The bell was not just a haunted object. It was a tombstone, a vessel for a tortured soul trapped in an eternal loop of her own betrayal. The sound he had heard was not a ghost. It was a memory, screaming. The hauntings grew worse. The single, nightly toll became a series of them, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, each one more jarring than the last. They rang at unpredictable hours, shattering the sanctity of the night. The sound itself seemed to change, to evolve. It was no longer just mournful, it was demanding, accusatory. The monks' nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Sleep became a luxury few could afford. Tempers grew short. The harmony of the temple was fractured. The horror began to bleed from the auditory into the visual. One evening, as Kenji was carrying water from the Otowa Falls, he glanced up at the bell tower. For a fleeting second, he saw her. A woman's figure, clad in a pale kimono, stood beside the bell. Her long black hair obscured her face, hanging like a veil of sorrow. The air around her seemed to shimmer, to warp with an intense cold. Kenji blinked, and she was gone. But the image was burned into his mind. He had not seen a ghost. He had seen grief given form. Others had similar experiences. A monk meditating near the tower felt an icy breath on his neck and heard a woman's soft, venomous whisper, cursing the name Kaito. Another found the ground beneath the bell littered with dead camellia blossoms, a flower associated with tragic death, though no camellia trees grew nearby. The entity, Aiko, was growing stronger, drawing energy from the fear she was creating. The temple, once a sanctuary, was becoming her stage. The horror was no longer passive, it was becoming personal. The breaking point came on the night of a full moon. A storm had rolled in, a violent tempest that seemed to match the turmoil in the temple. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, and thunder cracked the sky open, its roar echoing the phantom tolling of the bell.
The wind howled through the wooden halls like a legion of grieving spirits. Kenji was in the main hall with Master Genshin and a half-dozen other monks chanting the Heart Sutra. Their voices were a fragile defense against the chaos outside. Suddenly, above the roar of the storm, the bell began to ring. Bong, 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 bong. It was not a toll. It was a frantic, furious pounding. It was the sound of a prisoner beating against the bars of her cell. It was the sound of a heart breaking over and over again. The wooden beams of the temple groaned. A vase of flowers on the altar trembled and fell, shattering on the floor. The monks flinched with every peal, their faces pale with terror. And then, a new sound joined the cacophony. A woman's wail. It was not a distant whisper this time. It was raw, powerful, and it was coming from inside the hall. It wrapped around the pillars, slithered along the floor, a sound of such profound loss that it felt like a physical blow. One of the younger monks screamed and pointed a trembling finger towards the entrance. Standing in the open doorway, framed by the lightning-lit chaos of the storm, was Aiko. She was no longer a fleeting shadow. She was terrifyingly real, yet horribly ethereal. Rain and wind whipped around her, but her pale kimono remained unnaturally still. Her long black hair drifted around her as if underwater, and from beneath it, her face was visible for the first time. It was a mask of exquisite, incandescent rage. Her eyes were not eyes, they were burning coals of hatred. Her skin was the color of bleached bone. As she opened her mouth to scream again, her form seemed to flicker and distort, her limbs elongating, her shadow on the floor twisting into the shape of a great serpent.
The monks scrambled back, crying out in fear. Their sutras died in their throats. The sacred space had been breached. Only Master Genshin remained still. He rose slowly to his feet, his old bones creaking in protest. He did not look at her with fear, but with an immense, heartbreaking pity. "Aiko-san," he said, his voice calm and steady amidst the storm and the supernatural terror. "Your suffering has lasted long enough." The apparition shrieked, a sound that cracked the very air. "He stole my soul, my name. I am nothing but a ghost in a story he erased." Her voice was not one voice, but many, a chorus of pain, betrayal, and fury. "Your name is Aiko," Genshin said, taking a slow step forward. "You were the greatest artisan of your time. Your hands created a beauty that men like Kaito could only steal, never understand. Your legacy is not the one he wrote. It is this pain, and it is a prison." Kenji, frozen with terror, watched this impossible confrontation. He saw the flicker of confusion in the spirit's burning eyes. She had expected fear, exorcism, battle. She was not prepared for acknowledgement. "We do not seek to banish you," Genshin continued, his voice resonating with a compassion so pure it seemed to push back against the oppressive cold in the room. "We seek to liberate you. Your anger is justified, your rage is righteous, but it has chained you to this bell, to this mountain, for far too long. Your memory is not vengeance, it should be honor." Kenji felt a sudden surge of courage, a clarity that cut through his fear. He remembered Genshin's words, "Listen with your entire being." He was not just seeing a monster, he was seeing a woman in unbearable pain. He found his own voice. "Your bell is a masterpiece, Aiko-san," he called out, his voice shaking but clear. "Even with the sorrow it sings, we can feel the genius in it. Your art was not destroyed, it was just misunderstood." Aiko's form wavered. The serpentine shadow coiled and shrank. The inferno in her eyes dimmed, and for a moment, just a moment, they saw not a vengeful Yurei, but the face of a heartbroken woman. A single, spectral tear, as black as ink, traced a path down her pale cheek. The furious, frantic tolling of the bell outside stopped. A silence fell, deeper than any silence Kenji had ever known. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Aiko's form grew translucent, like smoke in the moonlight. She gave one last, shuddering sigh, not of rage, but of release. And then she dissolved into 1,000 motes of silver light, which drifted through the hall and vanished into the night. The storm broke. The rain gentled to a soft drizzle. The air in the hall, once freezing, was now clean and still. The oppressive weight was gone. The next morning, the sun rose on a transformed temple. The fear had dissipated, replaced by a solemn tranquility. The monks emerged from their quarters, their faces showing not fear, but a weary reverence for what they had witnessed. Master Genshin, Kenji, and several of the strongest monks made their way to the bell tower. They looked up at the great bronze bell, glinting in the morning light. It was just a bell now, beautiful, silent, and empty. The presence within it was gone. "It is over," Kenji said, a profound sense of relief washing over him.
The haunting is over, Genshin corrected gently. But her story is not. We cannot allow it to be erased again. He looked at the bell. This instrument can no longer serve its purpose. Its history is too deep, its memory too sorrowful. To ring it for prayer would be a disservice both to the gods and to her. It has earned its rest. A decision was made. The bell, Aiko's bell, would be taken down. The task was monumental. It took days of careful, reverent work. Using a complex system of ropes and pulleys, the monks slowly, carefully, lowered the multi-ton bronze masterpiece from its perch. As it touched the ground with a soft thud, a collective sigh of relief and respect went through the assembled monks. It felt like laying a giant to rest. They did not hide it away. They did not bury it in an unmarked grave. On a quiet, secluded plot of land on the temple grounds, overlooking the city, they interred the bell. They dug a deep, clean pit and gently rolled the great bronze artifact into it, laying it to rest in the cool, dark earth of Ottawa Mountain. They filled the grave, and over it, they erected a small, simple stone shrine, a hokora. It was not dedicated to a nameless ghost or a vengeful spirit. The inscription, carved by Kenji's own steady hand, was simple. In memory of Aiko, a peerless artist whose spirit forged this bronze. May she find eternal peace. Years passed. Kenji grew into a wise and respected monk, his hair now streaked with gray. He eventually succeeded Genshin as the abbot of Kiyomizu-dera. The temple had a new bell, one with a clear, peaceful tone that called the faithful to prayer without a hint of sorrow. The peace of the temple was restored, deeper and more resilient than before. But Kenji never forgot. Often, in the quiet of the evening, he would walk to the small moss-covered shrine. He would light a stick of incense and stand in silence, listening. He could no longer hear the phantom tolling of the bell. That sound was gone forever, silenced not by force but by compassion. Yet, sometimes, when the wind was just right, he thought he could hear something else. A faint, melodic hum rising from the earth. It was not a sound of sorrow or of rage. It was a note of pure, crystalline beauty, the sound Aiko had intended all along. The true voice of her art, finally freed from its prison of pain, singing quietly, eternally, from its resting place within the sacred mountain. Her legacy, at last, was not a curse, but a song, and the temple, having learned the true meaning of pure water, was finally, truly at peace.
Story: The Shadowless Woman of Gion. The world has two faces, especially a world as old as Kyoto. There's the face it shows you in the daylight, under the generous wash of the sun, a face of serene temples, immaculate gardens, and tourists smiling for cameras. But then there is the other face, the one that emerges when the sun bleeds out behind the western mountains, and the paper lanterns begin to glow like captive moons. This is the true face, the one etched with centuries of secrets, sorrows, and things that refuse to be forgotten. I learned this not from a book, but from the cold, hard whisper of experience on a narrow stone path in Gion. My name is Alex Thorne, and back then, I was a photographer. Not just any photographer, mind you. I was arrogant, ambitious, and chasing a cover for Wanderlust magazine. The assignment was a dream. Kyoto, the soul of a city. My editor wanted something beyond the cherry blossoms and golden pavilions. He wanted the ephemeral, the wabi-sabi, the quiet spirit of the place, and I was determined to deliver it. For the first week, I was a man possessed. I haunted the Arashiyama bamboo grove at dawn, capturing the cathedral-like shafts of light. I spent hours at Fushimi Inari, my lens tracing the hypnotic, vermilion path of 1,000 torii gates. I was getting beautiful shots, technically perfect shots, but they felt hollow. Postcards. They lacked the soul my editor craved. They lacked a story. Frustrated, I decided to shift my focus to Gion, the famed geisha district. I imagined the perfect shot, a geiko or maiko, a whisper of silk and white makeup, gliding down a rain-slicked alley, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of a lantern. It was a cliché, but a powerful one. Gion at night was a different beast altogether. The narrow streets, the ishidatami, were paved with stones worn smooth by centuries of wooden sandals or geita. The dark, latticed fronts of the machiya townhouses
seemed to lean in, sharing secrets just beyond my hearing. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, expensive perfume, and the faint, tantalizing aroma of cooking from hidden restaurants. It was intoxicating.
I found a small, smoky bar tucked away on a side street, a place that felt like it hadn't changed since the Showa era. The bartender, an elderly man named Tanaka-san, with hands as gnarled as ancient tree roots, poured me a measure of Yamazaki with the reverence of a priest. "You are looking for something," he said, not as a question but as a statement. His English was slow, deliberate. "A photograph," I replied, swirling the amber liquid. "The perfect photograph." He gave a dry chuckle, a sound like rustling leaves. "Many people look for perfection in Gion. They look for beauty, but they do not see the shadows." "The shadows are what give things depth," I said, quoting a photography professor from my college days. Tanaka-san polished a glass until it gleamed. "Sometimes the deepest things have no shadow at all." I must have looked confused because he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are stories, you see, old stories. Every stone in this district has heard a promise and a heartbreak. They say that if you walk the Hanamakoji lane late at night, when the moon is shy and the city is breathing its quietest breath, you might see her." "Her?" "A woman," he said, his eyes distant, "a geiko of impossible beauty, dressed in a kimono of the deepest indigo, embroidered with silver cranes. She walks with a grace that does not seem human. She is looking for something, or someone. But the thing you will notice, the thing that will stop your heart, is that she casts no shadow." I couldn't help but smile. A ghost story. How quaint. Every old city had them. "The Shadowless Woman of Gion. It's a great story, Tanaka-san." His face remained serious. He topped off my whiskey. "It is not a story to be enjoyed, Thorn-san. It is a warning. To see her is to be seen by her, and to be seen by her is a curse." I thanked him for the drink and the tale, dismissing it as the kind of local folklore that adds color to a place. But the image he'd painted, a beautiful geisha, a shadowless form, was undeniably compelling. It was exactly the kind of soul my editor was looking for. The idea took root in the fertile soil of my ambition. For the next 3 nights, I became a creature of the dark. I'd set up my tripod in the quietest corners of Dion. My camera aimed down the long, empty corridors of the alleys, waiting. I was patient. I was a hunter. The air grew colder, the nights longer. I saw late-night revelers, stray cats, and the occasional geiko hurrying to a late appointment, her apprentice trailing behind. But nothing out of the ordinary. My initial excitement began to curdle into disappointment. The rational part of my brain was winning. It was just a story. On the 4th night, a thick mist rolled in from the Kamo River, muffling the city in a blanket of gray. The lanterns cast hazy, diffused halos, their light struggling to pierce the gloom. The Ishitatami glistened, reflecting the lights like shattered stars. It was perfect. The atmosphere was heavy, pregnant with possibility. I was set up near a small, unnamed bridge arching over a narrow canal. My lens focused on the intersection of 2 alleys. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of condensation from the eaves of a tea house. And then, I saw her. She emerged from the mist at the far end of the alley, a silent apparition. Just as Tanaka-san had described, she wore a kimono of the richest, deepest indigo. As she moved closer, I could see the intricate silver embroidery of cranes in mid-flight, their wings seeming to shimmer with a light of their own. Her face was a perfect oval of white, her lips a slash of crimson. Her movements were liquid, a seamless glide over the uneven stones, her gita making no sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. My photographer's instincts took over. This is it. This is the shot.
My fingers, suddenly numb with cold and adrenaline, flew across the camera controls, adjusting the aperture, slowing the shutter speed to drink in the scarce light. I held my breath and pressed the button. The camera gave a soft, satisfying click. I took another. And another. She continued her silent procession, not looking at me, her gaze fixed on something far away, or perhaps deep within. She passed directly under one of the brightest lanterns, hanging from a wooden post. I zoomed in with my lens, my eye pressed to the viewfinder, and that's when I saw it. Or rather, what I didn't see.
The lantern above her threw the sharp, angular shadow of the roofline onto the ground.
It cast a long, distorted shadow of a nearby potted bonsai. But beneath her, where her own dark silhouette should have been stretched out on the damp stones, there was nothing. Just the slick, empty reflection of the lantern light. A cold dread, entirely different from the night's chill, seeped into my bones. It was a primal, instinctual fear, the kind your brain screams at you when it sees something that fundamentally breaks the rules of the world. Tanaka-san's words echoed in my head. The deepest things have no shadow at all. She reached the intersection, turned the corner without a sound, and vanished back into the mist. I stood frozen for a long moment, the camera feeling like a block of ice in my hands. I fumbled to check the display screen, my fingers trembling. The photos were there. They were stunning. She was perfectly in focus, an ethereal figure of impossible grace against the misty backdrop. The colors were rich, the composition flawless. But in every single shot, even as the world around her was a tapestry of light and shade, she was an island of pure form, utterly devoid of a shadow. I packed up my gear with frantic, clumsy movements and practically ran back to my hotel. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and poured myself a stiff drink from the minibar, but the alcohol did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird of my heart. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a bizarre optical illusion created by the mist and the specific angle of the lanterns. There had to be a rational explanation. There always was. But sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, restless thing, filled with images of a shadowless woman and the silent flight of silver cranes. The next day, I tried to immerse myself in my work, to force the image from my mind. I went to the Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, hoping its brilliant, sun-drenched facade could burn away the memory of the night. But now, I saw the world differently. I found myself obsessed with shadows, the long, sharp shadow of a temple pagoda, the soft, dappled shadows of maple leaves on a gravel path, the fleeting shadow of a bird overhead. They were proof of reality, a fundamental law of physics, and I had seen that law broken. That evening, I found myself drawn back to Tanaka-san's bar. He saw me enter and simply nodded. A flicker of something, pity, perhaps, in his old eyes. He poured my whiskey without me having to ask. "You saw her," he said. I didn't bother denying it. I just nodded, my throat tight. "Who is she?" He sighed, wiping the bar with a slow, methodical motion. Her name was Kiku. Long ago, in the Meiji era, they said she was the most beautiful geiko in all of Gion. Her dance could make old men weep, and her song could charm the moon from the sky. Men of great power and wealth vied for her attention, showering her with gifts. He paused, his gaze lost in the smoke-filled air. But her heart belonged to a young samurai, a man of little means but great honor. They met in secret, under the willow trees by the canal. They promised each other an eternity. But the samurai's clan had arranged a more advantageous match for him, a marriage to the daughter of a powerful lord. He was trapped between love and duty. My journalistic curiosity battled with my growing fear. What happened? He chose duty, Tanaka-san said, his voice flat. He told Kiku he could never see her again. He broke his promise. He broke her heart. That night, wearing the indigo kimono he had gifted her, the one with the silver cranes. She walked to the small bridge where you were standing last night, and she threw herself into the cold, dark water of the canal. A shiver traced its way down my spine. But why? Why no shadow? They say that when a person dies, with such profound sorrow, with a soul so completely shattered by betrayal, their connection to the world of the living is severed. A shadow is our anchor to the earth, our proof that we occupy a space in the sun's light. Kiku lost her anchor. She is untethered, drifting between worlds, forever searching for the man who promised her an eternity and gave her nothing. She is a wound in the fabric of this place. He looked at me, his eyes dark with ancient wisdom. And now you have seen her. You have captured her image. That is a dangerous thing, Thornson. You have tethered her to you. His words felt like a death sentence. I left the bar in a daze. The charming folklore had become a personal horror story, and I was its new protagonist.
The haunting escalated. It was no longer confined to the misty alleys of Jian. The next night, back in the clinical safety of my hotel room, I was working on my laptop, trying to edit photos from a different set, anything to distract myself. I caught a flicker of movement in the polished surface of the dark television screen. I looked up. For a split second, I saw her reflection standing behind me in the room, her indigo kimono a stark blot of color in the monochrome reflection. I spun around, my chair screeching on the floor. The room was empty. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I checked the locks on the door. I looked in the closet, under the bed like a terrified child. Nothing. I tried to tell myself I was exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but I knew what I had seen. The psychological toll was immense. I stopped sleeping more than an hour or two at a time. Every creak of the hotel, every whisper of wind was her. I started hearing things. The faint, heartbreaking melody of a shamisen being plucked, a sound that seemed to come from just outside my window, 12 stories up. Once, I heard the soft rustle of silk right beside my ear. My work, my ambition, all of it evaporated, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present fear. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. My eyes were bloodshot, circled with dark rings. I had lost weight. The confident, arrogant photographer was gone, replaced by a haunted, paranoid wreck. The worst part was the subtle warping of reality itself. I would be walking down a busy street in broad daylight, and for a terrifying second, the people around me would have no shadows. The world would flatten, becoming a grotesque, two-dimensional cartoon. Then I would blink, and the shadows would snap back into place, leaving me gasping for air, clutching a lamppost for support. She wasn't just haunting me, she was infecting my perception of the world, unraveling the very laws of physics I had once taken for granted.
I knew I couldn't go on like this.
I was coming apart at the seams. Fleeing Kyoto seemed like the only option, but a deeper, more terrifying thought held me there. What if he was no longer tied to Jian? Tanaka-san's words haunted me. You have tethered her to you. What if I ran back to New York, only to see her reflection in the glass of a skyscraper? What if she followed me across the ocean? The idea was paralyzing. I went back to Tanaka-san, a desperate man. I begged him. There must be a way. A temple, a priest, something to make it stop. He looked at me with deep sorrow. This is not a simple spirit, Thornson. This is a powerful grief, an onryo, a vengeful spirit born of betrayal. You cannot fight it. You cannot exorcise it. You can only try to appease it. Appease it. How? She is searching for her lost love, for the promise that was broken. She is trapped in her final moments. Perhaps if someone showed her a moment of true, selfless compassion, it might soothe the wound. It is a great risk. To face her directly, her sorrow is a bottomless well. It can drown you. He told me of a small, forgotten shrine to Benzaiten, the goddess of love and all things that flow, hidden in the back alleys of Jian, not far from the bridge where Kiku had ended her life. It was a place where lovers once left offerings, praying for blessings. It had long since fallen into disuse. Take an offering, he advised, something beautiful, something pure, and do not show fear. Show only sorrow for her sorrow. Apologize. Not for what you have done, but for what was done to her. Apologize on behalf of the man who broke her heart.
It sounded insane. Apologize to a ghost? But it was the only sliver of hope I had. That night, I bought a single, perfect white camellia, a flower that in the Japanese language of flowers, hanakotoba, can signify a gentle death or waiting. My hands trembled as I paid for it. I returned to the bridge. The mist was back, thicker than before, clinging to the world like a shroud. The air was deathly still and unnaturally cold. My every footstep on the Ishidatami sounded like a cannon shot in the oppressive silence. My camera was gone, left in the hotel room. I was no longer a hunter. I was the sacrifice. I found the tiny shrine, tucked into a moss-covered stone wall, just as Tanaka-san had described. It was little more than a small stone niche, weathered and neglected. I placed the white camellia inside, its pristine petals looking luminous in the gloom. Then, I waited. The silence deepened, stretching until my eardrums ached with the strain. And then, from the mist, she came. This time, there was no pretense of a distant, sorrowful beauty. As she glided towards me, the air grew frigid, and a profound sense of despair washed over me, so heavy and absolute that it brought me to my knees. It wasn't my despair, it was hers. A century of undiluted, perfect agony. I felt her betrayal, the shattering of her heart, the icy shock of the canal water. It was a psychic scream that threatened to tear my mind apart. She stopped a few feet away from me. The lanterns flickered and died, plunging the alley into near total darkness, save for the ghostly light that seemed to emanate from her silver cranes. Her face, which had seemed so beautiful from a distance, was now a mask of terrifying grief. Her eyes were not eyes. They were black holes, voids filled with endless pain. Her crimson lips were pulled back in a silent snarl. This was the true face of the Onryo. My survival instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything but stay kneeling before this nexus of supernatural rage. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. I thought of Tanaka-san's words. Do not show fear. Show only sorrow. Forcing the words past the terror that was choking me, I spoke, my voice a ragged whisper. Kiku-san. The oppressive weight of her sorrow intensified. I am so sorry, I stammered, tears of pure terror and sympathetic grief streaming down my face. I am so sorry for what he did to you. He was a fool. He threw away a treasure. Your love was beautiful, and his betrayal was a crime. On behalf of all the men who have ever broken a woman's heart, on behalf of the man who broke yours, I am sorry. Please find peace. I opened my eyes. She was still there, but something had changed. The snarl on her lips had softened. The terrifying void in her eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something else. Not forgiveness, but perhaps acknowledgement. A single perfect tear, black as ink, traced a path down her white-painted cheek. She held my gaze for a long moment, an eternity of silent communication passing between the living and the dead. Then she turned, and with that same soundless, liquid grace, she glided towards the bridge and faded, not into the mist, but into nothingness itself, like a film fading to black. As she disappeared, the lanterns flickered back to life, one by one. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by the normal, humid chill of a Kyoto night. The profound silence was broken by the distant sound of a train. The world had returned to normal. I stayed kneeling on the cold stones for a long time, utterly drained, a hollowed-out shell of a man. I had faced the abyss, and it had looked back at me. I flew out of Kyoto the next morning, leaving my assignment unfinished. I sent a brief, unapologetic email to my editor, telling him I was quitting. I couldn't explain. How could I? I never touched the photos I took of her. I deleted them from my memory card, then physically smashed the card and threw the pieces into the Pacific Ocean from the plane. I knew that even as digital files, they were a conduit, a doorway I had to seal forever. Years have passed. I no longer work as a photographer. I couldn't. My relationship with light and shadow was permanently broken that night.
I live a quiet life now, far from the allure of ancient cities and their dark secrets. I am married. I have a child. I have built a life of simple, boring, wonderful reality. But the haunting never truly left me. It's a quiet hum in the back of my mind, a scar on my soul. Sometimes, on a bright sunny day, I'll be walking down the street and a sudden, irrational panic will seize me. I will stop, my heart pounding, and I will look down at the pavement. I have to. I have to see my own dark shape trailing faithfully behind me. I have to see the proof that I am still anchored to this world. I have to make sure my shadow is still there. Story: The Weeping Cedars of Kurama Mountain. You have to understand something about Japan before we begin. It's a place of profound contradictions. In cities like Tokyo and Kyoto, you can stand amidst a million souls, bathed in the neon glow of a future that has already arrived, and yet be just a 10-minute train ride from a silence that is centuries old, a silence that has weight, a silence that remembers. My name is Dr. Alistair Finch, or it was. I used to be a man of academia, a folklorist who specialized in the syncretic belief systems of East Asia. I dealt in stories, in the dusty footnotes of forgotten texts. I believed I was documenting the quaint death rattles of superstition. I was a professional skeptic, an architect of rational explanations for the irrational. I was a fool. My journey to the precipice began, as many academic pursuits do, in the hushed, climate-controlled archives of a university library. I stumbled upon a reference to a British diplomat and amateur ethnographer named Thomas Blackwood, who was stationed in Kyoto in the early 1920s. He had become obsessed with Mount Kurama, not for the famous Kurama-dera temple that crowns its peak, nor for the legends of the Tengu, the bird-like warrior spirits said to have trained Japan's greatest samurai. Blackwood was interested in something else, something older. In his scattered letters, he spoke of a primordial energy on the mountain, an animism that predated both Buddhism and Shintoism. He called it the mountain's true voice. His writings grew more erratic over time. He mentioned strange occurrences on his late-night excursions, the forest floor seeming to shift under his feet, whispers that mimicked the voice of his deceased wife, and a pervasive feeling of being watched not by one pair of eyes, but by 1,000. His last recorded entry was a single frantic sentence: "The cedars are weeping, and I fear I now know why." Thomas Blackwood was never seen again. He vanished on Kurama Mountain in the autumn of 1923. The official report cited a hiking accident. His body was never found. For a folklorist like me, this was irresistible, a mystery wrapped in a legend, with a tangible historical hook. I secured a research grant, packed my bags, and flew to Kyoto, convinced I would write the definitive paper on the Blackwood case, demystifying the legend and cementing my own reputation. My arrogance was a shield, and I carried it with me all the way to the foot of the mountain.
In the fall is a stunning deception. The maples bleed crimson and gold, and the air is crisp with the promise of cold nights. I found a small, traditional ryokan in the village of Kurama, a stone's throw from the cable car that ferries tourists partway up the mountain. My plan was simple: spend a few days acclimatizing, interview locals, and then retrace Blackwood's steps. My first breakthrough came in a dusty little antique shop, tucked away on a side street. It was crammed with scrolls, pottery, and the ghosts of forgotten lives. The proprietor was a man named Kenji Tanaka, ancient and stooped, with eyes that seemed to hold the same deep, shadowed silence as the forest itself. When I mentioned Thomas Blackwood's name, a flicker of something, recognition, or perhaps warning, passed across his face. "The Englishman," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He was not looking for the Buddha. He was not looking for the Tengu. He was looking for a door. Some doors should not be opened. I pressed him, explaining my research. He listened patiently, polishing a small ceramic cup with a worn cloth. After a long silence, he shuffled to the back of the shop and returned with a small, leather-bound journal. It was damp-stained and warped, but the script inside, though faded, was unmistakably English. "This was found years ago, by a woodsman, near the Kinonamichi Trail," Tanaka said, his eyes avoiding mine. "Far from the temple path. It is not for sale. But you have the same look in your eyes as he did. The look of a man
who mistakes knowledge for wisdom. You may read it here, but it does not leave my shop. For the next 2 days, I sat in that dimly lit shop, the scent of old wood and incense filling my lungs, and I devoured Thomas Blackwood's final journal. It was a descent into madness. October 12th, 1923. The energy here is palpable. The monks speak of Reiki, of a healing, universal power. They are right about the power, but wrong about its nature. It is not benevolent. It is simply potent. It is an amplifier. Whatever one brings to this mountain, love, peace, reverence, is magnified. But I have come to suspect the reverse is also true. What happens if one brings grief or hatred? October 19th, 1923. I have begun to explore the Western trails, away from the pilgrims. The silence here is different. It is not empty. It's a pressurized silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Last night I heard a sound. Not a bird, not an animal. A rhythmic, metallic tapping. Faint, but persistent. It stopped the moment I tried to locate its source.
October 26, 1923. The locals have a name for it. Ushino Tokimairi. The curse of the hour of the ox. A ritual of blackest magic performed between 1 and 3 in the morning. A person consumed by vengeance. Dressed in white, with a crown of candles on their head, nails an effigy of their hated enemy to one of the sacred trees. They say it summons malevolent spirits, the Yurei and the Oni, to do their bidding. I dismissed it as folklore, but I found one today. A small straw doll, pierced with a rusty nail, pinned to a great cedar. The air around it was ice cold. November 2nd, 1923. I can no longer sleep. The tapping sound is closer now. And there is something else. A weeping. It seems to come from the trees themselves. A sound of immense, unending sorrow. It seeps into my dreams. I see a woman in white, her face a mask of grief, but behind her, in the shadows, something else. Something vast and ancient and utterly without pity. It is the mountain's true heart, and it is feeding on her hatred. November 5th, 1923. The weeping is constant. I must find its source. I feel I am on the verge of a terrible discovery. The air is thick with it tonight. The boundary between our world and theirs is thin here, dangerously thin. The cedars are weeping, and I fear I now know why. That was the final entry. My academic skepticism was shaken but not broken. A man on the edge, I reasoned. Alone in a foreign land, projecting his own loneliness and fears onto the landscape. The Ushino Tokimairi was a fascinating, if disturbing, cultural artifact. The weeping cedars, wind whistling through the dense foliage. The rhythmic tapping, a woodpecker. There was a rational explanation for everything. I thanked Mr. Tanaka, returned the journal, and prepared for my own expedition. I would go that very night. I would carry a digital recorder, a high-lumen flashlight, a GPS tracker, the tools of a modern man. I would conquer Blackwood's ghosts with data. I waited until midnight. The village was asleep, shrouded in a thin mist that rolled down from the mountain. The entrance to the forest path was marked by a stone archway, a silent invitation into the dark. The moment I stepped under it, the air changed. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees. The ambient noise of the village
the hum of a distant refrigerator, the bark of...
The path was well worn at first, but as I followed the directions I'd copied from Blackwood's journal, it began to dissolve. I pushed deeper, away from the manicured safety of the temple trail. The forest here was older, wilder. The cedar trees, the famous Kitayama Sugi, were colossal. They soared hundreds of feet into the starless sky, their trunks perfectly straight, like the pillars of a cathedral built for giants. Their sheer scale was oppressive. They blocked out the sky, creating a canopy of absolute blackness. My flashlight beam seemed pathetic, swallowed by the immense dark just a few feet from where I stood. The silence was the first thing to break. It wasn't a loud noise, but a subtle one, a twig snapping just to my left. I froze, sweeping my light across the undergrowth. Nothing, just ferns and moss-covered stones. I told myself it was a deer, a fox. I kept walking. Then came the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The air was unnervingly still. It was a faint, sibilant sound, like sand pouring over silk. It slithered at the very edge of my hearing. I stopped again, holding my breath. The whispering coalesced, for just a second, into a word. My name, Alistair. It was a woman's voice, soft and sorrowful. It was the voice of my mother, who had passed away a decade earlier. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in my gut. This wasn't in the journal. This was new. My mind raced for a rationalization. Auditory pareidolia, the brain creating patterns from random noise. Stress, fatigue. I recited the explanation to myself like a mantra, a ward against the encroaching fear. I pushed on, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The path had all but disappeared now. I was navigating by the glow of my GPS, surrounded by the identical, towering trunks of the cedars. I felt a disorienting sense of vertigo, as if the entire forest was a single, repeating pattern designed to drive an intruder mad. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was exactly as Blackwood had described, a metallic rhythmic sound. It was distant but sharp, cutting through the thick silence. It was the sound of a hammer striking a nail. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a woodpecker. It was too regular, too methodical, and it was coming from the direction I was heading. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I moved towards the sound. My role as a folklorist, a detached observer, was all I had left to cling to. I had to see, I had to document. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. I crept forward, using the massive trees for cover. Through a gap in the foliage, I saw a small clearing, and in the center of that clearing, I saw her. A woman, dressed in a simple white kimono. Her long black hair was unbound, obscuring her face. On her head, she wore a small iron tripod, and in the tripod 3 white candles burned, their flames flickering and casting long, dancing shadows. She was facing one of the largest cedars, a true monarch of the forest. In one hand, she held a small straw doll, in the other, a hammer. Tap. 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 She was nailing the doll to the sacred tree. It was real. The Ushi no Toki Mayuri. I was witnessing a curse being born. My academic curiosity curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. This wasn't a story. This was a living ritual of hatred, and I was an uninvited guest. I fumbled for my camera, my hand shaking so badly I could barely operate it. I needed proof. I raised it, trying to frame the shot. But as I looked through the lens, something happened. The air in the clearing grew thick, viscous. The candlelight seemed to bend, to warp, as if passing through a heat haze. The shadows cast by the trees deepened, stretching and twisting into unnatural shapes. They weren't just shadows anymore, they were things, tall, spindly figures with limbs that were too long, heads that lolled at impossible angles. They gathered at the edge of the clearing, drawn by the woman's ritual like moths to a flame. And then I heard the weeping. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't in my head. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low, guttural sobbing of 1,000 voices, filled with an eternity of pain and loss. It resonated in my chest, a physical vibration of sorrow.
The great cedars themselves seemed to be producing the sound, their ancient bark groaning and weeping a black, viscous sap that ran down their trunks like tears. The woman in white finished her hammering. The final sharp thwack echoed in the suddenly silent clearing. She stood still for a moment, her shoulders heaving. Then she slowly turned her head. Her face was a pale oval in the candlelight, her features contorted by a grief so profound it was no longer human. But it wasn't her face that paralyzed me, it was what stood behind her. The shadows had coalesced. It was a single entity now, a being of pure nightmare. It was impossibly tall, its form vaguely humanoid but fundamentally wrong. It had no face, only a smooth dark surface where one should be. Its body seemed woven from shadow and moonlight, and the deepest despairs of the forest. It was one of the Oni, the demons of legend, drawn from its slumber by the summons of a broken human heart. The creature was looking directly at me. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a solid lump of fear. I just dropped my camera and ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, blind with panic. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my clothes and skin. The weeping sound was all around me, a deafening chorus of despair. The rhythmic tapping started again, but now it was everywhere, echoing from every tree, a mocking percussion to my frantic flight. I glanced at my GPS. The screen was a scramble of static, no signal. I was lost, utterly, hopelessly lost. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every direction I turned, I was met with the same wall of impenetrable black trees. It felt like the mountain itself was actively and malevolently toying with me, bending space and time to ensure I would never leave. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I stumbled over a root and fell hard, my head striking a rock. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I lay there, gasping on the damp earth, the scent of rot and decay filling my nostrils. The weeping was closer now, the whispers circling me. I could feel their cold breath on the back of my neck. I was going to die here. Just like Thomas Blackwood. Another foolish outsider, swallowed by the mountain. My shield of rationality was shattered, and all that was left was a raw, primal fear. I managed to push myself up. My head throbbed, and a warm trickle of blood ran down my temple. My flashlight was gone, lost in the fall. I was in total darkness, save for the faint spectral glow of phosphorescent moss on some of the trees. It was a graveyard light. As my eyes adjusted, I saw them. They were all around me, standing just at the edge of the faint moss light. The U-ray. The ghosts of those who had died on the mountain, their souls tethered to this place. They were translucent, shimmering figures, their forms twisted by the sorrow or violence of their deaths. A lost hiker, a spurned lover who had taken their own life, a warrior from a forgotten age. They didn't move towards me, they just watched, their empty eyes filled with the same weeping sorrow that saturated the air. They were waiting. Behind them, I could sense the larger presence, the Oni, the demon from the clearing. It was hunting me, and these lost souls were its hounds, flushing out the prey. Despair washed over me. I closed my eyes, ready for the end, and then I heard a new sound. It was faint but clear, a deep resonant gong. My eyes snapped open. The sound came again. A single, pure tone that cut through the cacophony of weeping like a blade. It was the sound of the great temple bell at Karamadera. The monks must be performing a pre-dawn ceremony. That sound was a lifeline. It was a direction. But as I stumbled towards it, the forest fought back. The ground seemed to slope steeply upwards, no matter which way I turned. The weeping grew louder, angrier, trying to drown out the bell. A huge, dark shape loomed in front of me, blocking the way. It was the Oni. It raised a shadowy arm, and the air grew so cold it burned my lungs. I was done for. But then, something else happened. From the canopy high above, another figure descended. It didn't fall. It drifted down like a great black leaf. It landed silently between me and the Oni. It was a Tengu. It was just as the legends described, yet so much more terrifyingly real. It stood over 7 feet tall, lean and wiry, dressed in the robes of a mountain ascetic. Its skin was deep red, its hair a wild shock of white, and its face was dominated by a long, sharp, beak-like nose. Its eyes glowed with a faint golden light,
filled, not with malice, but with an ancient, cold authority. It held a simple fan made of feathers in one hand. The Oni recoiled, hissing like steam from a broken pipe. The Yurei flickered and drew back into the deeper shadows. The Tengu didn't even look at me. Its burning gaze was fixed on the demon. It simply raised its fan and flicked its wrist. A gust of wind, impossibly strong, impossibly focused, erupted from the fan. It struck the Oni like a physical blow. The demon shrieked, a sound of grinding rock and breaking glass, and its form dissolved, blown away like so much smoke and shadow. The Tengu stood there for a moment longer. The forest was silent again. The weeping had stopped. The presence of the demon was gone. Then, slowly, the guardian of the mountain turned its head and looked at me. I have never felt so small, so utterly insignificant. It was a look that spanned eons, a look of profound annoyance, as if I were an insect it had found crawling on its dinner plate. It was the disdain of a god for a mortal who had trespassed where he did not belong. Without a word, it turned and melted back into the trees, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. The temple bell gonged again, closer now. I was no longer lost. A clear, though faint, path lay before me. I followed it, my body screaming in protest, my mind a hollowed-out cavern of shock. I emerged from the tree line, just as the first gray light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. I was scratched, bruised, and bleeding, my clothes in tatters. I looked like I had survived a war, and in a way, I had.
I didn't stop. I walked through the sleeping village, past my ryokan, and straight to the train station. I waited on the cold platform for the first train to Kyoto, never once looking back at the mountain that loomed behind me. Silent and brooding in the morning mist, I never returned to Mr. Tanaka's shop. I never finished my research paper. I left Japan the next day and never went back. I resigned from my university position, citing personal reasons. I can't prove any of this. My camera was lost, my GPS records were wiped. My only wounds were ones that could be explained by a fall. All I have is the memory and the knowledge. The knowledge that the stories are true, all of them. The world is not the safe, rational, well-lit place we pretend it is. There are other things, older things, that exist on the periphery, in the ancient, dark places of the earth. Mount Kurama is one of those places. It has its guardians, its demons, its lost souls. It has an energy that amplifies what is in the human heart, and sometimes when a person's hatred is strong enough, they can open a door. And what comes through that door? It doesn't distinguish between the guilty and the innocent, it simply feeds. I don't sleep much anymore. Sometimes, when the night is very quiet, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, and the sound of weeping carried on the wind from a forest half a world away. The cedars of Kurama are still weeping. And I know now, with a certainty that chills me to my very soul, that they are weeping for us all.
Story: The 44th Room. An investigation into a Kyoto University haunting. Forward. They say that every university has its ghosts. They are specters born from pressure, from ambition, from heartbreak and despair, the accumulated psychic residue of brilliant young minds pushed to their very limits. Most are little more than campfire tales whispered in common rooms after midnight to spook freshmen. They are anecdotes, urban legends. But some stories refuse to remain legends. They sink their roots deep into the very wood and concrete of a place, staining it with a persistent, undeniable darkness. They become part of the building's architecture, an unseen but deeply felt blueprint of tragedy. This is one of those stories. For decades, students at the prestigious Kyoto University have spoken in hushed tones about a particular room in one of the older, now demolished, residential halls. The Yoshida South Dormitory was a relic, a post-war structure of unadorned concrete and aging timber that stood in stark contrast to the ancient, elegant temples that dot the city. It was a place of transition, a temporary home for Japan's brightest, filled with the smell of instant ramen, cheap cigarettes, and simmering academic anxiety. And in this dorm, there was a room that was more than just a room. It was a litmus test for sanity, a place where the veil between worlds was worn perilously thin. They called it many things over the years, but its most common designation was simple, chilling, and direct. They called it the 44th room. In Japanese, and indeed in many East Asian cultures, the number 4 is phonetically identical to the word for death. It is a deeply ingrained superstition. You will not find a fourth floor in many hospitals or hotels. To be assigned room 44, then, was to be handed a key to a place of double death, a space linguistically and spiritually condemned. Most students, upon receiving such an assignment, would immediately request a change, citing a sudden illness, a family emergency, any excuse to avoid it.
But every few years, a student would arrive who was too rational, too proud, or simply too unaware to object, and for them, the legend would stir from its slumber. What follows is a reconstruction of the last and most infamous incident connected to the 44th room, pieced together from student testimonies, archived university records, and the fragmented journal of the young man who last turned the key. His name was Kenji Tanaka, and he did not believe in ghosts. Part 1. The Scholar and the Threshold. Kenji Tanaka arrived in Kyoto on a sweltering afternoon in late August of 1998. The air was thick and heavy, a wet blanket saturated with the incessant, high-pitched thrum of cicadas. He was a product of Japan's rugged northern Tohoku region, a boy from a small fishing village who had clawed his way into the country's top echelon of academia through sheer unyielding intellect. He was a scholarship student in the fiercely competitive Department of Physics, a world of quantum mechanics and theoretical cosmology that left no room for superstition. To Kenji, the world was a series of elegant, solvable equations. Everything, from the orbit of the planets to the firing of his own neurons, could be understood through logic and empirical evidence. Ghosts, curses, and unlucky numbers were, in his view, the refuge of minds unwilling to grapple with the beautiful, cold rationality of the universe. He found the Yoshida South dormitory to be an offense to his ordered sensibilities. It was a concrete block, stained with years of rain and pollution. The hallways were dim, smelling of dust, mildew, and something else. Something vaguely metallic and biological, like old blood or rust. He was assigned his room by a bored, chain-smoking administrator who barely looked up from his paperwork. Tanaka, Kenji, room 44, 4th floor.
Kenji took the old-fashioned brass key without a flicker of recognition. It was just a number. He lugged his single, heavy suitcase up the 4 flights of echoing concrete stairs. The air grew progressively warmer and more still with each floor, the sound of the cicadas outside fading to a distant, dreamlike hum. The 4th floor hallway was silent, the doors to the other rooms closed. A single naked bulb cast a sickly yellow light that seemed to be absorbed by the dark wooden doors rather than illuminating the space. He found the door at the very end of the hall. The numbers 44 were screwed into the wood, the brass tarnished and green in places. He slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, and he had to jiggle it forcefully before the mechanism turned with a loud, grating clunk that echoed in the oppressive silence. The room was small, monastic. A simple wooden desk was pushed against the far wall, beneath a large single-pane window that looked out over a tangle of overgrown trees. A built-in wardrobe, a narrow bed frame with a thin tatami mat, and a single wooden chair were the only other furnishings. The air inside was strangely cold, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the hallway. It was a dead, stagnant cold, the kind you find in a cellar that hasn't been opened for years, and it carried a faint, unusual scent. It wasn't mold or dust. It was clean, almost antiseptic, but with an undercurrent of something organic and faintly sweet, like wilting flowers or old paper. He dropped his suitcase and crossed to the window, wrestling with the rusty latch to push it open. A breath of humid air stirred the room, but it did little to dispel the chill. As he stood there looking down at the courtyard, a peculiar sensation washed over him. The distinct primal feeling of being watched. He turned, scanning the empty room. The wardrobe door was slightly ajar. The bare walls seemed to have shadows in their corners that the light didn't quite reach. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. Jet lag, dehydration. He was a man of science. There was always a logical explanation. He spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, arranging his physics textbooks on the desk with mathematical precision. He tried to ignore the way the floorboards creaked under his weight, not with the friendly groan of old wood, but with a series of sharp, protesting cracks. as if he were an unwelcome intruder. That evening, he met his neighbor from across the hall, a friendly senior student named Satoshi. Satoshi was a literature major with a laid-back demeanor and eyes that held a certain weary wisdom. He saw Kenji's open door and came over to introduce himself. "Welcome to the Forgotten Floor," Satoshi said with a grin, leaning against the doorframe. "You're brave. Most people avoid this wing." "Why's that?" Kenji asked, organizing his pencils into a neat row. "Is the plumbing bad?" Satoshi's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He glanced at the number on Kenji's door. "Oh, you know, old building, noisy, just has a reputation." He paused. "You're in room 44, huh? Is that a problem?" No, of course not," Satoshi said, a little too quickly. "It's just a number. Some people are superstitious, that's all." He changed the subject, asking Kenji about his studies and hometown. But as he left, he gave the room one last, lingering look. A look that Kenji, in his rational mind, filed away as simple curiosity, but which his instincts registered as something closer to pity. That night, Kenji's sleep was shallow and plagued by strange dreams. He dreamt of complex, impossible equations scrawled across the walls of his room in a frantic, spidery script. He dreamt of the sound of a pen scratching furiously on paper, a sound that seemed to come from right beside his ear. He woke up several times, drenched in a cold sweat, the room's unnatural chills sinking deep into his bones. The sound of scratching seemed to linger for a moment, even after he was awake, a ghost of a sound, before fading into the silence. In the morning, exhausted, he noticed something new. On the dark wooden floorboards, directly under the center of his desk, was a faint, reddish-brown stain. It was about the size of a dinner plate, its edges blurred and faded. He hadn't noticed it the day before. It looked old, like a wine or ink spill that someone had tried unsuccessfully to scrub away. He knelt, touching it. The wood there felt no different from the rest of the floor. He shrugged it off. An old dorm. It was bound to have its share of stains and scars. He placed his desk chair over it and began his day. The world of physics awaited, and it was far more real and compelling than any discolored patch of flooring. But the stain was a seed, and in the dead, cold air of room 44, it had already begun to grow. Part 2. The Unraveling of Reason. The first few weeks of the semester were a blur of lectures, study groups, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Kenji threw himself into his work, using it as a shield against the growing unease he felt within the four walls of his room. But the room, it seemed, would not be ignored. The haunting began not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny, insidious whispers. It started with sounds. At the periphery of his hearing, as he struggled to solve a complex problem set late at night, he would hear it. The faint, dry rustle of turning pages, even though his own books lay still. Sometimes it was a soft, almost inaudible sigh, like someone releasing a breath they'd been holding for a very long time. He would whip his head around, heart pounding, only to find the room empty, silent, and cold. Then came the physical intrusions. He would leave a pencil perfectly aligned with the edge of his desk, only to return from the communal bathroom to find it rolled to the center. He would close the wardrobe door firmly before leaving for class, and come back to find it hanging wide open, revealing the dark, empty space within. He explained it all away. The building was old, its foundations settling. The floors were slanted, a draft from the window, his own forgetfulness, a symptom of sleep deprivation. For every strange occurrence, Kenji Tanaka, the physicist, had a hypothesis. He was a scientist observing a phenomenon, and he would not leap to irrational conclusions. The stain on the floor became a focal point of his disquiet. One Saturday, annoyed by its presence, he bought a strong cleaner and a stiff-bristled brush, and spent an hour on his hands and knees, scrubbing at the discolored wood. He worked until his knuckles were raw, and the room filled with the acrid smell of chemicals. The stain faded, becoming almost invisible against the dark grain. Satisfied, he cleaned up and went out. When he returned that evening, the stain was back. It wasn't just back. It seemed darker,
its edges more defined, the reddish-brown hue more vibrant, as if it were a fresh bruise on the skin of the wood. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, pricked at the base of his skull. This defied logic. He ran the experiment again the next day, with the same result. The stain would fade under his efforts, only to return hours later, insolent and immutable. It was as if the room was healing itself, rejecting his attempts to erase its memory.
His studies began to suffer. He couldn't concentrate. The equations that once seemed so clear and beautiful now swam before his sleep-starved eyes. He found himself staring at the walls for long stretches, listening. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was a weighted, expectant silence, pregnant with an unspoken presence. He felt constantly watched, scrutinized by an unseen intelligence. The cold in the room was no longer just a physical sensation. It was an emotional one, a profound and desolate loneliness that seeped into his very soul. He started spending more and more time in the university library, staying until it closed, dreading the moment he would have to walk down that silent fourth-floor hallway and turn the key to room 44. One night, desperate for human contact, he knocked on Satoshi's door. His neighbor took one look at Kenji's pale face and the dark circles under his eyes and ushered him in. "You look terrible, man," Satoshi said, handing him a cup of hot tea. "Is everything okay?" Kenji hesitated. Then the words spilled out of him in a frantic, jumbled rush. The sounds, the moving objects, the cold, the oppressive feeling of being watched, and the stain. He told him about the stain. He expected Satoshi to laugh, to tell him he was losing his mind. But Satoshi didn't laugh. He listened with a grave expression, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. When Kenji finished, the literature student was quiet for a long time. "I should have told you when you moved in," Satoshi said finally, his voice low. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to scare you. I hoped it wouldn't start again." "Start again? What are you talking about?" Kenji's voice was sharp with fear and frustration. Satoshi took a deep breath. "That room has a history, Kenji. A bad one. They say it's been that way for at least 30 years. Every few years, someone like you, a top student, usually from out of town, someone rational, moves in, and the same things start happening." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The last person who lived there about 5 years ago, his name was Aoyama. He was a prodigy, a math genius. Quiet, didn't have many friends. He became obsessed, just like you. He told people the room was thinking at him. He said he could hear complex theorems being whispered from the walls, things beyond his own understanding. People thought he was cracking under the pressure." Satoshi's eyes were dark with memory. "One morning he just wasn't there. His door was locked from the inside. They had to break it down. The room was empty. His belongings were gone. The official story is that he had a breakdown, packed his bags in the middle of the night, and just disappeared. Dropped out, went home. That's the official story," Kenji repeated, his mouth dry. "What's the real one?" Satoshi looked away towards the window. "The janitor who helped break down the door told me something. He said the window was wide open, and on the pavement 4 floors down, there was a single, dark stain. They cleaned it up before anyone else saw. Aoyama was brilliant, but he was also poor. He had nowhere else to go. He wouldn't have just left." A suffocating pressure was building in Kenji's chest. "A suicide?" "No one knows for sure," Satoshi said, "but the legend goes deeper. They say Aoyama isn't the first. He's just the most recent. The story is that the room, it chooses someone. It studies them. And if it finds them lacking, or if they try to fight back, it gets rid of them." He looked Kenji dead in the eye. "That stain on your floor, Kenji? They say that's where Aoyama used to sit and work. For hours. Every single day." Kenji stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's insane. It's a ghost story. A ridiculous urban legend." The physicist in him was screaming, clawing for control against the tide of primal fear. "Is it?" Satoshi asked softly. "Look at yourself. You're a ghost already. Get out of that room, Kenji. Go to the administration. Sleep on my floor if you have to, but don't spend another night in there." Pride, however, is a powerful and blinding force. To Kenji, leaving the room would be an admission of defeat. It would mean that the unexplainable had triumphed over the rational, that a ghost story was more powerful than the laws of physics.
It was anathema to his entire being. "I'm fine," he said, his voice tight. "I'm just tired. I appreciate the concern, Satoshi." He walked out of Satoshi's room and back across the hall, the weight of his neighbor's warning heavy on his shoulders. As he reached for his door handle, he heard it again, clearer than ever before. It came from inside his room. The sound of a pen scratching furiously on paper.
Part 3. The Inevitable Dialogue. The wall between Kenji's reality and the room's nightmare dissolved completely. He no longer bothered trying to find logical explanations. He accepted the haunting as a new, terrible law of his personal universe. The phenomena escalated, growing more brazen, more personal. He would wake in the middle of the night to find his meticulously organized textbooks rearranged on his desk, open to pages on thermodynamics and entropy, the study of chaos and decay. The whispers were no longer formless. They were coalescing into coherent fragments. He heard snatches of mathematical proofs, lines of mournful classical poetry, and most terrifyingly, his own name, sighed on a cold, bodiless breath.
He stopped attending lectures, he stopped eating. He became a prisoner, locked in a psychological battle with the very space he inhabited. He would sit at his desk for hours, staring at the stain on the floor, which now seemed to possess an almost liquid, shimmering quality in the dim light. He felt a strange connection to the long-gone Aoyama, a kinship of intellect and isolation. He imagined the brilliant math student sitting in this very chair, slowly being driven mad by the same spectral intrusions. The room was no longer just a place, it was an entity. It had a personality, cold, intellectual, and profoundly, achingly sad. And it was lonely. Kenji began to feel that the haunting was not an act of aggression, but a desperate attempt at communication. The breaking point came on a cold, rain-swept night in early November. The academic year was marching on without him, and the weight of his failure was a physical thing. He sat at his desk, staring at his own pale, gaunt reflection in the black glass of the window, the rain lashing against it like tiny, frantic fists. The cold in the room was absolute, his breath plumed in front of him. And then, for the first time, he saw it. It wasn't in the room with him, but in the reflection. Superimposed over his own image in the glass was another figure. It was faint, translucent, like an old photograph double-exposed. It was the figure of a young man about his own age, with sharp, intelligent features and wire-rimmed glasses. He was sitting in the same chair, at the same desk, but he was not Kenji. He was hunched over, his shoulders slumped in an attitude of immense despair. He was writing something with a pen that didn't exist. Kenji's heart seized in his chest, a knot of pure, unadulterated terror. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He watched as the spectral figure in the window slowly, ever so slowly, lifted its head. Its eyes, dark and bottomless pits of sorrow, met Kenji's in the reflection. There was no malice in them, only a vast cosmic weariness.
The rationalist was dead. The physicist was gone. All that remained was a terrified young man, face to face with the impossible. His voice, when it came, was a raw, trembling whisper. "Aoyama-san," he breathed. Are you the one who lived here before me?" In the reflection, the translucent head of the apparition gave a single, slow, deliberate nod. A strange calm settled over Kenji. The moment of confirmation, as terrifying as it was also a relief. He was not mad. This was real. And if it was real, perhaps it could be reasoned with. He was a scholar. Aoyama was a scholar. They were men of intellect. Surely, there could be a dialogue. He took a deep breath, marshaling the last vestiges of his pride and his foolish, misplaced courage. He spoke to the reflection, his voice gaining a sliver of its old confidence. "Listen," he said, trying to keep his tone respectful but firm. "I understand. I know this was your space, but it's mine now. I paid my rent. I have to study. I have to live here." He paused, his next words sealing his fate. "With all due respect, Aoyama-san, there's no room for you here anymore. I'm asking you to please leave." He had expected the apparition to fade, to argue, to wail. It did none of those things. For a long moment, the sad, weary expression on the ghost's face remained unchanged. Then, something shifted. The sadness did not turn to anger. It simply evaporated. It was replaced by a chilling, profound emptiness, a void. The eyes that looked back at him were no longer sorrowful. They were as blank and cold as the space between galaxies. The apparition looked through him, as if he were nothing more than a temporary obstruction, a pane of glass soon to be shattered. The scratching sound stopped. The temperature in the room plummeted, the cold becoming a physical, crushing weight. And then a thought, not his own, bloomed in the center of Kenji's mind. It was not a voice, not a sound, but a pure, crystalline concept, delivered with the icy finality of a mathematical axiom.
You're right. The thought echoed in the silent spaces of his skull. There isn't enough room.
The apparition in the window smiled, a thin, bloodless, terrible smile. It did not fade away. Instead, it was Kenji's own reflection that began to flicker and distort, as if the glass could no longer hold his image. The room behind him seemed to warp and stretch, the walls pressing in. The last thing Kenji saw in the window was the face of Aoyama, no longer translucent, but solid and real, looking out at the rain from a room that was, once again, his own. Part 4. The Vacancy. The next morning, Satoshi woke with a sense of unease. He hadn't seen a light on in Kenji's room all night, nor had he heard any movement. Kenji had a crucial quantum physics midterm that morning, one he couldn't afford to miss. At 10 a.m., when Kenji still hadn't emerged, Satoshi's unease curdled into genuine fear. He knocked on the door of room 44. "Kenji? Tanaka-san? Are you in there?" Silence. He tried the handle. It was locked. He pressed his ear to the cold wood. He could hear nothing. Not the rustle of pages. Not the sound of breathing. Nothing. He ran downstairs and found the dorm administrator, the same bored man who had given Kenji the key. After much arguing and pleading, the administrator grudgingly followed Satoshi up the stairs with a master key. The master key slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. "It's bolted," the administrator grunted, rattling the handle uselessly. From the inside. A cold sweat broke out on Satoshi's neck. He looked at the administrator, his eyes wide with panic. "We have to break it down." It took 2 solid, shoulder-first impacts from the much larger administrator to splinter the wood around the lock. The door flew open with a crack, slamming against the inside wall. They both froze in the doorway, staring into the room. It was immaculate. Spotless. The bed was neatly made, the thin futon folded with military precision. The desk was clear, wiped clean of any dust or papers. The physics textbooks were stacked in a perfect, squared-off pile in the corner. Kenji's suitcase, the one he had arrived with, stood zipped and closed by the door. All of his clothes were gone from the wardrobe. All of his pencils and pens were gone from the desk. The room was not just tidy, it was sterile. It looked as if no one had ever lived there at all. It felt calm, peaceful, and utterly, terrifyingly empty. Then Satoshi noticed 2 things. First, the window. It was wide open, letting in the damp, cold November air. The rusty old latch was bent and broken, as if it had been forced with incredible strength. Second, the floor. He looked at the spot under the desk where Kenji had shown him the stubborn, reddish-brown stain. It was gone. The floorboards were clean, the wood a uniform, unblemished, dark brown. "Looks like your friend did a runner," the administrator said with a sigh of annoyance, surveying the scene. "Packed up and left without paying next month's rent. What a pain." But Satoshi's gaze was fixed on the open window. He slowly walked towards it, a horrifying certainty dawning on him. He leaned out, his heart hammering against his ribs, and looked down. 4 floors below, on the dark, wet concrete of the courtyard, was a shape, a crumpled, broken thing, surrounded by a slowly spreading halo of something dark. The rain from the night before had washed much of it away, but there was no mistaking it. It was the final, indelible stain. Conclusion. The official report from the Kyoto Prefectural Police concluded that Kenji Tanaka, a promising physics student, had tragically taken his own life. The narrative was simple and clean. Overwhelmed by academic pressure and suffering from an undiagnosed depressive disorder, He had packed his belongings, intending to go home, but changed his mind at the last moment. A tragedy, but a closed case. The Yoshida South Dormitory was demolished in 2015, replaced by a modern, sterile facility with state-of-the-art security and no fourth floor. The story of Room 44 has since faded further into legend, a ghost story told by older alumni to frighten new students who have never set foot in the old building. But I have spoken to Satoshi, now a respected professor of literature at a university in Tokyo. His hair is gray, but his eyes still hold the memory of that day. He does not believe Kenji Tanaka committed suicide. It wasn't a suicide, he told me, his voice quiet but firm. It was an eviction. The room. The room is a predator. It's an intellectual predator. It finds a brilliant mind, it toys with it, it learns from it. And when it's done, or when its occupant defies it, it cleans house. It throws out what it no longer needs to make space for the next specimen. He believes that Aoyama, the math genius, didn't just haunt the room. In some metaphysical, horrifying way, he became the room. His consciousness, his intellect, his despair, they merged with the space, creating a sentient, haunted intellect that lies in wait. Was Kenji pushed by a spectral hand? Or did the room psychologically dismantle him, piece by piece, until he saw no other way out? Does the distinction even matter? The building is gone, but energy, as Kenji Tanaka knew better than anyone, is never destroyed. It only changes form, and one cannot help but wonder if that dark, hungry intelligence, born in the heart of Room 44, simply moved on. Perhaps it settled in another old library, another quiet study hall, another lonely dorm room, waiting for another bright, rational mind to turn the key, waiting to ask its silent, terrible question, waiting to remind them that in the house of knowledge, there are some doors that should never, ever be opened.
Story: The Man at the Gate. It's a strange thing, ambition. It's a fire that can warm you, drive you, illuminate your path. But if you let it burn too hot, too recklessly, it can consume you. It can lead you down paths you were never meant to walk and show you things you can never unsee. I know this because my ambition, my all-consuming need for the perfect shot, led me to him, the man at the gate. My name is Alex Carter, and before the fall of 2019, I was a photographer on the brink. Not financially, mind you. I was successful. My work had graced the covers of travel magazines and hung in sterile, overpriced galleries in New York and London. I had an agent who called me a visionary and a portfolio that could open almost any door, but inside, the fire was flickering. I was technically proficient, but creatively bankrupt. I was taking pictures, but I wasn't making them anymore. The world had become a series of predictable compositions, of golden hour light and leading lines. I was bored, jaded, desperate for something to shock my system, to make me feel that raw electric thrill of discovery again. That's what brought me to Japan, an assignment for a high-profile publication, a feature on the sacred and the modern. It was the perfect gig, a chance to immerse myself in a culture that felt both ancient and futuristic. For weeks, I shot the neon-drenched canyons of Shinjuku, the serene temples of Kamakura, the organized chaos of Shibuya Crossing. Good stuff, polished, professional, and utterly soulless. My photos were postcards, beautiful but empty. The dread was setting in. I was a fraud, a technician masquerading as an artist. Then I came to Kyoto, and to Fushimi Inari Taisha. Even if you don't know the name, you know the image. Thousands of vibrant vermilion torii gates forming a winding, seemingly endless tunnel up a mountainside. It's one of the most photographed places on Earth, a tourist magnet. And for that reason, I'd initially dismissed it as a cliché. But the deadline was looming, and I needed a killer closing shot for the article. So, with a sigh of professional resignation, I went. My first visit was a daytime affair, a battle against a relentless tide of humanity. I jostled for space with selfie sticks, tour groups, and laughing students.
The sun beat down, turning the air thick and humid. The gates, which looked so mystical in photos, felt more like a theme park attraction. The magic was choked by the sheer volume of people. I took a few obligatory shots, my heart sinking with each sterile click of the shutter. This wasn't it. This was the opposite of what I needed. As I descended the mountain, dejected, I noticed something. The light began to change. The harsh midday sun softened into a warm, honeyed glow. The crowds started to thin as tour buses prepared for departure. The atmosphere of the shrine began to shift. The vibrant orange of the gates deepened to a blood red. The shadows cast by the dense canopy of the ancient forest stretched long and thin, like grasping fingers. The air grew still, and the cicadas' drone seemed to amplify, taking on a hypnotic, almost sinister quality. An idea sparked in my mind, a dangerous, stupid, brilliant idea. What if I came back? Not during the day, with the masses, but later, at dusk, or even after, when the shrine was empty. When the mountain was left to its own devices, to its gods and spirits. The kami and the kitsune, the foxes. I'd read about them. Messengers of the god Inari, powerful, mischievous, and sometimes malevolent shapeshifters. A shiver, not entirely unpleasant, ran down my spine. This was it. This was the edge I was looking for. To capture the shrine not as a tourist destination, but as a place of genuine primal power. A place that felt truly sacred and perhaps truly dangerous.
The next day, I prepared. I packed light. My trusty Nikon, a tripod, a couple of lenses, extra batteries, and a powerful flashlight. I told myself it was for a sunset shoot, a lie to placate the sensible part of my brain that was screaming in protest. I arrived in the late afternoon, around 4 p.m. The golden hour was just beginning to kiss the top of the mountain. This time, it was different. The crowds were manageable, their voices softer, more reverent. I began the ascent, the path a ribbon of fiery red snaking through the deepening green of the forest. I walked past the main shrine, past the smaller sub-shrines with their stone fox statues, some draped with red bibs like offerings. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth, cedar, and something else. Something metallic and ancient, like old coins or dried blood. I climbed higher and higher, letting the last of the day trippers pass me on their way down. Their smiles seemed to falter as they looked at me, an unspoken question in their eyes. You're going the wrong way, the mountain is closing. I ignored them. The light was intoxicating. It filtered through the thousands of gateposts, creating a strobe effect, a rhythmic dance of light and shadow. I was in a trance, shooting frame after frame, feeling the old fire begin to roar back to life. I reached the Yatsutsuji intersection, a clearing about halfway up the mountain that offered a panoramic view of Kyoto. The city was a glittering tapestry below, a sea of concrete and light, but my gaze was fixed upwards, towards the summit. The path from here became steeper, the gates more weathered, the forest thicker. This was where most people turned back. This was where my real journey would begin. The sun bled out of the sky, leaving behind streaks of bruised purple and orange. Darkness didn't fall here. It rose from the ground up, seeping out from between the trees, pooling in the hollows. I switched on my flashlight, its beam cutting a stark white tunnel through the oppressive black. The only sounds were my own breathing, the crunch of my boots on the gravel path and the whisper of wind through the trees.
And that's when the fog rolled in. It wasn't a natural fog. It came suddenly, unnaturally. It didn't drift, it swarmed. One moment, I could see the path ahead. The next, I was enveloped in a thick, clammy blanket of gray. It clung to me, muffling all sound, isolating me completely. My powerful flashlight beam was swallowed just a few feet in front of me. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at my skin. I told myself to stay calm. I was on a clearly marked path. All I had to do was turn around and walk back down. Simple. I turned. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes, my hand trailing along the cool, lacquered wood, of the gates to guide me. The path should have started to widen, the descent should have become more gradual, but it didn't. It felt like I was still climbing. The air grew colder. The silence deepened, becoming a physical pressure against my eardrums. I stopped, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was wrong, terribly wrong. I checked the compass on my phone. The screen flickered erratically before dying, even though I had a full battery. I was lost. Not just lost on a mountain, but lost in a way that defied logic. The path itself felt malicious, like it was actively working against me, rearranging itself in the fog. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice was swallowed by the fog, deadened. The only reply was an echo that sounded distorted, warped. It sounded like someone else's voice mocking me. I was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack when I saw it. A faint, warm light, flickering through the oppressive gray. It was a lantern, hanging from the eaves of a small, unlit shrine I hadn't noticed before, just off the main path. And, standing beneath it, perfectly still, was a man.
Relief washed over me so intensely it made me weak at the knees. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I'm lost." I stumbled towards him, my flashlight beam illuminating him more clearly. He was an old man, perhaps in his late 70s or 80s, but he stood with a straight-back stillness that belied his age. He was dressed in traditional formal hakama and a dark hari jacket, clothing I'd only seen in museums. His face was a mask of deep-set wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, sparkling with a strange amusement. He held a simple wooden staff in one hand, and he was smiling. It was a serene, placid smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lost?" he said. His voice was calm and melodic, his English perfect, with a faint, unplaceable accent that sounded almost British, but impossibly old. It is easy to lose one's way on this mountain, especially when the spirits are feeling playful. He chuckled softly, a dry, rustling sound. "The fog has a mind of its own tonight." "You can say that again," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I was just trying to head back down. The main path seems to have disappeared on me." The old man's smile widened a fraction. "The main path is for most people. It shows you what they want you to see. But for a seeker, an artist such as yourself," he gestured towards the camera hanging from my neck, "there are other paths, better paths." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. How did he know I was an artist? I hadn't said a word. "I can see it in your eyes," he said, as if reading my mind. "The hunger, the desire to see beyond the veil. You are not here for souvenirs. You are here for truth, for a beauty that is terrible and absolute." His words resonated with a terrifying accuracy. It was as if he had peeled back my skull and was looking directly at the desperate, ambitious core of me. I am," I managed to stammer. "I thought as much," he said, his gaze unwavering. "The main path down is currently recalcitrant. It will not reveal itself to you. But I know another way. A shortcut, you might say. It is a path few are privileged to see. It will take you through the heart of the mountain, not just its surface." He paused, his dark eyes boring into me. "And it will show you sights that will fulfill that hunger of yours, Mr. Carter. It will give you the shot you have been searching for." He knew my name. My blood ran cold. The panic I'd felt before was a child's fear compared to the existential dread that was now flooding my system. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn and plunge back into the disorienting fog rather than spend another second in this man's presence. But the other part of me, the ambitious, reckless photographer, was captivated. A path few are privileged to see. The shot you have been searching for. He was offering me exactly what I wanted. He was offering me the forbidden fruit, and God help me, I wanted to taste it. How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He simply smiled again, that placid, unnerving smile. "The mountain knows its visitors, and I am a friend of the mountain, a gatekeeper of sorts. Now, will you follow me, or would you prefer to wander in the fog until morning? Assuming, of course, that morning comes for you." The threat was veiled, polite, and absolutely terrifying. I had no choice. Or perhaps
I had already made my choice the moment I decided to stay on the mountain after dark.
"I'll follow you," I said, the words feeling like a death sentence. "A wise decision," the old man said, his eyes twinkling. He turned with a grace that was almost fluid and tapped his staff once on the ground. He didn't head for a path I could see. Instead, he walked towards a dense section of the forest, right next to the small shrine. As I got closer, I saw it. A single, unadorned torii gate, half swallowed by vines and shadows. It was made of dark, weathered wood, not the vibrant vermilion of the others. It looked ancient, forgotten. It wasn't on any map. "The entrance is here," he said, and without another word, he stepped through the gate and was swallowed by the darkness beyond. My heart was a jackhammer. This was madness. This was the moment in a horror movie where the audience screams, "Don't go in there." But my ambition was a hook in my jaw, pulling me forward. The perfect shot. The heart of the mountain. I took a deep breath, the cold, foggy air burning my lungs, and I followed him through the gate. The world on the other side was instantly, fundamentally different. The fog was gone. The air was preternaturally still and cold, so cold I could see my breath plume in front of me. The sky above was a starless, inky black, devoid of any moon or city glow. We were standing on a path, yes, but it was not the gravel path of the main shrine. This was a path of black, packed earth, flanked on both sides by towering ancient cedars, whose tops were lost in the impenetrable darkness above. And the gates. They were here too, but they were wrong. They were not the cheerful vermilion of Fushimi Inari. These torii were made of a blackened, petrified-looking wood, covered in patches of pale, luminous moss. They were older, taller, and spaced farther apart than the ones on the main trail, creating deep pools of shadow between them. They felt less like a sacred walkway, and more like the skeletal ribs of some colossal, long-dead beast. There were no inscriptions on them, no dates, no donors' names. They were anonymous, eternal, and utterly terrifying. The silence was absolute. There were no cicadas, no wind, no distant city hum. The only sound was the soft crunch of our footsteps on the black earth. I raised my camera instinctively, a nervous habit, and looked through the viewfinder. What I saw made me drop the camera to my chest, a gasp escaping my lips. Through the lens, the scene was subtly different. In the deep shadows between the black gates, things were moving. Quick, fleeting shapes. They were too fast to get a clear look at, but they were low to the ground, sinuous, and had a disturbing number of limbs or tails. And in the viewfinder, I could see pairs of tiny, glowing golden eyes, watching me from the darkness. Kitsune. I looked up, and the shadows were empty again. "Is something wrong, Mr. Carter?" the old man asked, not even turning to look at me. "Your camera seems to have startled you." I thought I saw something," I said, my voice trembling. "You are seeing," he corrected gently, "but you are not yet perceiving. Your machine sees more than your eyes are ready to accept. That is often the way of it at the threshold." "The threshold? Between your world and this one," he said, with a casualness that was horrifying. "This is the spine of the mountain, its true face. The path you were on before? A lovely facade. A painting on a screen to keep the uninvited from stumbling into the green room." He chuckled again, that dry, rustling sound. "We do so dislike uninvited guests." We walked on, deeper into this impossible, nightmare version of the shrine. The feeling of being watched was immense. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me from the suffocating darkness of the forest. I could hear things now, too. Faint whispers that seemed to slither on the edge of my hearing, speaking in a language I didn't understand, punctuated by what sounded like high-pitched, chittering laughter. I tried to use my camera again. I was a photographer, damn it. This was what I came for. I lifted the Nikon, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I focused on the long, terrifying corridor of black gates ahead of me. I pressed the shutter button. The camera's screen lit up, but instead of the image I had just taken, it displayed a chaotic mess of digital static, a screaming collage of green and purple lines. Then, for a split second, an image flashed on the screen. It was a face, my face, but it was gaunt, emaciated, with eyes wide with a permanent, silent scream. My skin was gray, and clinging to my shoulders were two small, fox-like creatures with sharp teeth and glowing golden eyes, their claws digging into my flesh. I cried out and nearly dropped the camera. I fumbled with the buttons, trying to get back to the menu, but the screen was now just black, dead.
"Your machine is struggling," the old man observed calmly. He had stopped and was now facing me. The faint light from the phosphorescent moss cast his wrinkled face in a ghoulish, pale green light. His smile was gone. His expression was one of clinical curiosity. It is trying to capture a reality for which it was not designed. It is trying to photograph a ghost and finding its own reflection instead. "What is this place?" I demanded, my fear finally overriding my awe. "Who are you?" The old man sighed, a sound of immense weariness. "I have had many names, but you may think of me as the toll keeper. All paths have a toll, Mr. Carter, especially the beautiful ones." He gestured around us at the awful, majestic vista of black gates. "You wanted the perfect shot. You wanted truth. Here it is, but truth has a price." "What price?" I asked, my throat dry. His smile returned, but this time it was different. It was wide, predatory, and utterly inhuman. It stretched his wrinkled face into a grotesque mask, and for the first time, I saw that his teeth were not the yellowed nubs of an old man, but were too sharp, too numerous, and pointed like a canid's. His eyes, which had been dark and intelligent, now began to glow with a faint internal golden light, the same gold as the eyes in the forest. "The price is you," he whispered, his voice now a layered chorus of whispers and chittering. "A new memory for the mountain, a new statue for one of the forgotten shrines, an artist to capture its beauty for eternity. You came seeking a shot. You will become the shot." His form began to waver, to shimmer at the edges. His shadow, cast by the moss light, stretched and elongated, twisting into a massive nine-tailed silhouette against the trees behind him. The chittering from the forest grew louder, closer. The golden eyes multiplied, emerging from the shadows, surrounding us. They weren't just in the forest anymore. They were on the path, trotting silently towards us. Foxes. Dozens of them. But they were wrong. Some were too large, some had too many tails, and their eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence. This was it. The trap had sprung. My ambition had led me to the altar, and the priests were gathering. Every cell in my body screamed one word: run. I turned and sprinted back the way we came. I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs on fire, my feet pounding on the black earth. The sound of chittering, laughing pursuit was right behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The old man was gone, but the foxes were there, dozens of them, flowing over the path like a river of shadow and teeth, their golden eyes like embers from a hellish fire. They weren't just running. They were loping, moving with an unnatural speed. I ran through the black gates, one after another. The path twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember. It was a labyrinth. I'd pass a distinctively gnarled tree, run for a full minute, and then pass the same tree again. The mountain was playing with me, hurting me, tiring me out for the kill. Despair was a physical weight, crushing me. I was going to die here, in this impossible place, torn apart by demon foxes, my soul trapped forever to satisfy a whim of the mountain. In my blind panic, my hand brushed against my jacket pocket. I felt something small and hard. Omamori, the good luck charm. I had bought it earlier that day at the main shrine on a whim. It was a small brocaded silk pouch with a prayer sealed inside for protection during travel. It was a tourist trinket, a superstition. But
It was all I had. I ripped it from my pocket, my fingers fumbling. I didn't know what to do. There were no instructions for this. As the foxes closed in, their hot, foul breath now audible behind me, I did the only thing I could think of. I held the charm aloft and screamed, "Please, help me!" A desperate, pathetic prayer to whatever benevolent God might still be listening. I tripped. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, tumbling head over heels. I saw the ground rushing up to meet me, felt the impact, and then nothing. I didn't hit black earth. I hit gravel. I opened my eyes, blinking away the shock. I was lying on the familiar gravel path of the main shrine. Above me, the torii gates were a comforting, familiar vermilion. The thick, malevolent fog was gone. The air was just normal, cool night air. Through the trees, I could see the distant, reassuring glow of Kyoto. I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming in protest. I was bruised, scratched, and covered in dirt. I looked behind me. There was no black gate, no gnarled tree. Just the normal, winding path of the shrine. The chittering was gone. The golden eyes were gone. I was alone.
I didn't wait to question it. I ran. I half ran, half stumbled down the mountain, my legs shaking uncontrollably. I didn't stop, didn't look back, until I burst out of the main entrance and stood under the sterile, safe glow of a streetlight. The shrine was dark, the gates for the night locked behind me. It was over. I stumbled back to my hotel in a daze, ignoring the strange looks from the night clerk. I locked myself in my room, my body trembling with adrenaline and residual terror. Was it real? Was it all a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and panic? A waking nightmare? I needed proof. My camera. With shaking hands, I picked it up from where it still hung around my neck. It was caked in mud, but it turned on. I navigated to the gallery, my heart pounding. The screen was no longer dead. I scrolled through the photos. There were the beautiful, soulless shots from the city, the daytime shots of Fushimi Inari, the gorgeous, golden hour photos from my ascent, and then there were the photos from after the fog rolled in. Most of them were exactly as I'd seen on the screen. Corrupted files, black images, screaming digital static. I scrolled through dozens of them, my hopes sinking. It was a hallucination. My camera had just malfunctioned in the cold. And then I saw it. The last photo. It was one single, perfect, uncorrupted image. It was a shot of the path. A long, dark corridor of black torii gates, covered in pale, glowing moss. The composition was flawless. The atmosphere was thick, with a beauty so profound and terrifying it made my breath catch in my throat. It was the single greatest photograph I had ever taken. It was the truth I had been seeking. I zoomed in, my finger trembling on the screen. I scanned the edges of the frame, the deep pools of shadow between the trees. And there, in the bottom right corner, half hidden behind one of the black posts, was a figure. It was the old man. I could just make out his formal robes, his staff. He was looking directly at the camera, and his eyes were glowing with a soft, predatory golden light. I completed my assignment. I never submitted that final photo. It's for me and me alone, a permanent, high-resolution reminder. I am a celebrated photographer again. My trip to Japan was hailed as a creative renaissance. They say my new work has a depth, a darkness, a sense of gravitas it never had before. They call me a visionary. They don't know that I sleep with the lights on now. They don't know that I can't look at a fox, even in a picture, without feeling a cold knot of terror in my stomach. And they don't know that sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I can still hear the faint, chittering laughter on the edge of my hearing. I got my perfect shot. I found the terrible beauty I was looking for. The tollkeeper was true to his word, but I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that a part of me never made it off that mountain. A part of me is still there, on that black path, wandering for eternity. The price is still being paid. So if you ever find yourself at Fushimi Inari as dusk is falling and you feel the siren call of ambition, the urge to leave the beaten path to find something no one else has seen, I beg you, turn back, because some gates are not meant to be opened.
And if you meet a polite old man who offers you a shortcut, run. Do not speak to him. Do not listen to his promises. Just run. Run and pray he doesn't know your name.